Stuart Butterfield once said, "Every customer interaction is a marketing opportunity. If you go above and beyond on the customer service side, people are much more likely to recommend you." And we couldn't agree more. Welcome to Growing a B2B SaaS. This show is not like any of the other startup podcasts. On this show, you'll get actionable and usable advice. You'll hear about all aspects of growing a business to a business software company. Customer success, sales, funding, bootstrapping, exits, scaling, everything you need to know about growing a startup with SaaS. And you'll get it from someone who's going through the same journey. Welcome to Growing a B2B SaaS. Now your host, Joran Hoffman.
Welcome back to another episode on the Grow Your B2B SaaS podcast. In this podcast, we will discuss all topics related to growing your SaaS, no matter in which stage you're in. The growth of your SaaS is highly related to your clients getting value out of your product. You can also say they need to be successful, as when they are, your churn will decrease and they will start talking about you, which will both accelerate your growth. Success is hereby the key word. Today, we're going to talk about customer success. If done right, it will help you to gain more revenue from your current clients and keep them longer. Ideally, you get this without increasing always your company headcount. We will talk about customer success today with Mike Dry, who I personally had the pleasure to work with in the past at Leadfeeder. He has an extensive background in working with clients, always finding ways to make them successful, which will have a positive impact on company results. In the last 5 years, he grew within Leadfeeder from a customer success manager role to being the senior director, customer success and support. At this moment, his team consists of 37 professionals across different sub-departments, and his main focus is to make sure those 8,000 customers and 20,000 product users are getting value out of the product from Leadfeeder and EchoBot. I'm also saying EchoBot as it just merged last year with them. It's great to see you again, Mike, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Joran. You've just given me such a great introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Took me some prep, but happy you liked it. I'm just going to jump them right in. Like, if people are not convinced after an intro like this, like, why should people listen to you?
Well, I mean, hopefully I've got some value to bring. I think I've spent the last 10 years working in various different customer-facing roles within various different technology businesses, from very small startups of 2 people all the way up to the organization that I'm part of now that has over 300 employees and, as you mentioned, several thousand customers. So I think in the course of that time, I think I've seen pretty much almost every scenario you could imagine in terms of what a customer might want from you, what your team might want from you, what everybody might want from you as a business. And I think along the way, we've kind of come up with some good ways, partially in working together, some very good ways to make that a reality. So like I said, I mean, it's down to the viewer in the end whether I provide them any value, but I'd like to back myself to say that I could.
Nice. Well, people are going to find out today. We're going to talk about customer success, and we're going to start with the really basics. What does customer success mean to you?
Classic interview question this. What does customer success mean to you? I think at its most basic, it's really simple. Like, the way that technology businesses work is fundamentally different to the way that many businesses worked in the past. In the past, it was a lot easier to hand a product to your customer and say, here, use this. We're going to charge you one-off, and then we wish you the best of luck with it. Whereas now, in the world of predominantly, subscription businesses within technology, what customer success is doing is providing customers with the support and the know-how to be able to generate the success from the product that you have, and ultimately to continue purchasing from you over the longer term. So I suppose that's maybe slightly more business savvy way of looking at it. I think from your customer's perspective, what customer success means is having somebody on the other end of the phone that they can speak to try and solve a problem, or having somebody that they can bounce ideas around with about a new way to use your product, for instance. So as with many of these questions, it just depends on who you ask and whether they are the ones paying for the customer success department or if they are the ones who are speaking to that department on a regular basis.
Yeah, nice intro to it. And like customer success, of course, people need to get value out of your product right away, right? Especially also when you're a small company. But when do you recommend companies to really start thinking about setting up a customer success department, or at least having somebody responsible for it?
I would say having somebody responsible for customer success kind of as a concept, i.e. how successful are your customers being with your product, almost has to be day one. You won't have a department but it should be very much at the forefront of your mind if you're the founder of the business of, now that we have this product in the hand of customers, what happens next? Do they use the product regularly? Are they using it productively? Do they want to continue using it over the longer period of time? And so on and so forth. I think the point at which you decide you want an actual department to take this on is, as much as anything, is a volume question. At what point do you get to a stage where you can no longer answer every question that the customer has, and also do everything else you need to do, and also do those things well? So for instance, I think it's obviously in the times of kind of cost cutting and not wanting to spend any money, I think it's really common for businesses to say, look, we're just going to carry on as we are. Maybe we'll have somebody do support part-time, maybe even just to get started, and we're just going to see what happens, which works for a little while. But eventually what happens is that everything starts to go slightly awry. If you don't have somebody keeping track of how effective is your support team, how effective are you at actually speaking to customers when you need them to, at a certain point, if you don't start to take steps in that direction, I think you pay the price longer term, because you start to struggle to grow the underlying business, because you will inevitably get churn. To put a real yardstick in, I really do think it comes down to that. At what point is it negatively impacting whoever in your business is currently covering this, more than it is benefiting the business for them to continue? So for instance, if you have your team on the sales side, for instance, the salespeople are just going to look after their deals indefinitely. At what point does that start to become a burden so that they don't make more sales, and therefore you slow down the velocity of your overall business? At that moment, you need to have a CS team, which means slightly before that, you need to see it coming and go and hire somebody to run that.
Exactly. I think that's a good summary because, for example, to give the listeners an example, I'm currently running the business side of myself along with a marketer. So I'm doing the acquisition and the customer success. And of course, having that background, I definitely make sure that I also take care of the clients, making sure they're successful. So for me, for example, it's just putting everything into a CRM system where acquisition and current clients are going to be monitored in a way that I will keep following up on them, see how they're doing, just to make sure that they are going to be successful. Because in the end, I can keep adding clients to the bucket, but they need to stay as well, and they need to be successful.
I think that there is a good point you just made as well, in terms of maybe what you've made me think about there is kind of how you get ahead of the game a little bit. Because if you're there listening to this right now and you're a founder of a business and you're taking the role that you've just described, you're looking after all these customers at the beginning. Fair enough. It can be really tempting, just because you need to get a lot done, just to kind of start fudging things a little bit. So, you don't keep accurate records of X, Y, and Z. You don't start to create reports around what customers are doing, whatever might be relevant for your business. But again, these are the sorts of things that they pay dividends to you over time if you do them up front. So for instance, just a simple example, you have a SaaS business. If you can work out early on what the key determinants are of value for your customer when they see that value within your product, and then you turn that into a report, it can be pretty easy for you subsequently, as you grow your customer base, to see the value that's being derived from that product. And from there, it's going to be really easy when you hire your CS team, whoever they may be, to look at those numbers and start to think, okay, that's good. How can we improve it? But if they don't have that information at that point, or it's not possible to backdate it because you didn't start tracking it, whatever it might mean, then you're effectively delaying yourself later on. You might lose 3, 4, 5, 6 months that you could be using to improve a process just by people creating one. So you kind of need to just sort of skate to where the puck is going to be a little bit and start thinking about what are the bits that need to be done. They're going to need to be done in 3 months. Would it make sense to make a start on them now? Make sure that you're tracking certain user events. Make sure that you're keeping a track of the sort of conversations you're having with customers and how you resolve those problems. Maybe even a really simple example. Maybe you're not the person who's going to be creating reports, but maybe, for instance, you're the one that's solving the problems that are inherent within a new SaaS platform. Maybe there are just bugs we are not going to solve anytime soon, but you found the way to work around those problems. Starting to document them, throw them into an internal wiki or a help center if it's appropriate for the customers to see those, that's going to pay dividends to you later on, because either your future support or success team is going to use that, or your customers can see that and they can solve the problem themselves. So again, it's just trying to get to that point where you see 3 steps ahead, which is, as founders of businesses, that is kind of what you're supposed to be doing. You see 3 steps ahead and you take those initial steps that will make it easier for the people that come behind you.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I'm not saying that we do everything right, but we also started to build like a help center ourselves, just also to avoid keep having the same questions all the time. Like, how should I do this? Or how should I install X? So basically every time you get a certain question, document it, make it presentable to the customer. I would definitely say so. So you're going to save yourself time as well. So they're going to go through the steps themselves without having to come to you always.
Absolutely. And that, again, these are the sorts of things they pay dividends 6 months, 12 months later when you've got a team. Because anything that's currently causing you or your colleagues that you have at the moment, maybe there's 2 or 3 of you in the office there, if it's costing you an hour now, when you subsequently have a team of 15 people and maybe they're not all in the same office, it's going to cost you a lot more time to teach those people those solutions to those problems and then have that kind of percolate out to other people. It's a massive step in the right direction if you document things early on.
Yeah, can't agree more. You talked about data, right? You talked about tracking. Let's talk about data, or let's talk about metrics more in particular. What are the 3 most important metrics you would pick for any CS department or when you want to get into CS?
I think that's one of those questions where it depends on who asks, right? For the audience that this will probably reach, which is kind of founders and maybe senior execs in startup businesses, I think it comes back to financial metrics. It comes back to gross churn, net churn, and expansion rate. Why I've chosen those would be gross churn is a really good sign of how your product is doing on its own. You give your product to 100 customers, 5 of them churn. Maybe that's fine for you, maybe it's not. 50 of them churn. Why is that? That will give you a really good sign of kind of product-led or product-level problems, I would say. Maybe there are other things about your business that are causing customers to churn, but gross churn is a really good proxy for what's going on with the product. I think if you look at net churn, I think that gives you a really good measure for how good your business is at fighting that back, because what that represents is all the gross churn minus the level of expansion you've been able to generate from that customer base. So bringing in expansion, which was my third one. With that, you start to say, okay, well, how effective is my team at selling to that customer base? Which is another good proxy for health, because if those customers are not happy on some level, it's going to be very difficult for you to sell them more. In times like these, with the economy being what it is, and I'm sure a lot of people feeling the pinch, I think honing in on those financial metrics is a good starting point. And then to take it to the step after that, I would say you as a business starting to figure out what are the actual factors that drive these results. For instance, is the gross churn high because there's a missing feature in your product? The more you look into that, the more likely you are to find it. Is the net churn really not going in the right direction because you don't have anything else to sell them? There isn't an add-on. There isn't another user package you can sell them or another feature that you can put some pricing behind. That's going to give you another sign of what you need to be doing as a business to really head in the right direction. So those would be some metrics to focus on. But again, the reason why it depends on who you ask. If you ask me in terms of which metrics would be most valuable to the CSMs to be able to do their jobs, so the customer success managers, that's going to be a lot more down to kind of customer health. How frequently do they use your product? How productively do they use your product? It's very easy, and a lot of companies do this. They have a very simple, blunt metric for what health is. It's literally just, well, how often do people sign in? That's not necessarily, though, a good sign. Maybe they need to sign in very frequently because your product isn't giving them the value they need it when they need it. So they have to come back more often. So I'd recommend there, that dragging us too far off topic, to start thinking a little bit about what does in your business, your product, what does productive usage mean? Like, how do people actually derive value from your product? If you can apply a health score metric to that, or collect up a few of those and track how frequently they happen to your client base and compare that to your gross and net churn, you're probably going to be a really long way down the path of having a really good set of metrics to work from to know the real health of your business.
Yeah, nice. And if you, for any way, you can also add like the end value of clients towards that health metric, that's going to be really powerful. But not every SaaS business can do that, of course, because you're delivering some kind of service and you're not always sure what they're going to get out of that. As in, you don't always know what happens after they use your tool.
For sure. And I think this might be a good one for the founders listening to this product, and maybe early in their journey, and maybe this is the first time they've made a product like the one they're currently making. Any opportunity you have within your product, or maybe even through email reports or something else, any opportunity you have to link the fact that they've purchased your product to that end value that you promised them in the course of the purchase is going to hugely impact your success with keeping those customers and expanding them and ultimately having happy customers. More than likely, in the course of them purchasing the product, they've gone to your website, they've absorbed the message, they say, okay, I have this problem, whatever it might be, this is the solution to solving it. Too many businesses, when you purchase the product, subsequently allow the customer or give the customer the impression they need to guess at the value they derived afterwards. But what you want is a really good feedback loop that says, you purchased for this reason. Maybe you even told us in the course of signing up, this is the reason why you wanted this product. Somewhere in the product, we should be showing you again where that value has been derived. So you could apply that principle to almost any SaaS business you can think of. You probably sold them time saving or more leads or more efficiency in some way through their business. Is there something that you can put into your product that shows them that they've done right, they've done exactly what you wanted them to do, and they've gained the value from it? If you do that, customers are happier.
And with happy customers, they stay longer and it's going to grow your business. And That's what
Yes,
this is
sir.
all about. Like the questions now are more towards people starting out, right? And you already talked about a little bit. Health scores relate to the CSM. So where do you measure them on? Like you grew the team, you probably set up processes. Can you share some strategies, processes you have used to grow the CS team?
Sure. Yeah. So if we think specifically about kind of hiring and growing the team that way and knowing when you need to hire, that again comes back to metrics. So you should have one of two probably pretty simple ways to figure out when you need to hire somebody. So one pretty simple one is workload. At what point, owing to the systems and processes and products you have in place, is your team member, your customer success manager, no longer able to service customers at the level you want them to, purely because of the number of customers they have? So maybe that's a number of customers that you choose, or maybe, and more commonly, the number you choose is the amount of revenue that they're responsible for, because that can also influence behavior in the right way. So for instance, if you have a mix of small and large customers and you basically let the team know that, hey, we only hire once we reach another revenue threshold, that inadvertently kind of tells the team they need to focus their time on the bigger ones, really, because the smaller ones, it's going to take a long time for them to add up to something that's going to drive future hiring and such. That's one way of looking at it. The other side of it would be in terms of if we take workload to be obviously a high priority and a high value thing for us to be thinking about, I'd say the other side of the coin there is talking about the value that's being generated. So at what point, owing again maybe slightly to workload, at what point do you start to see diminishing returns where you just can't expand customers at the rate that you were able to before? You just don't because of workload and such. But again, it all comes back to workload. It just depends on how you want to measure it, really. In terms of kind of successfully growing the team, because it's one thing to hire the people, but it's another thing to actually make it a success. I think, of course, there's lots of different processes around that. I think one thing I'll give you credit for, because I think you spearheaded this and we worked together with, was documenting a lot of things that you want the team to do, So we had handbooks for everything. We've had guides for basically everything that you would want. It should be really simple for anybody that joins the team to know what they need to do, both as an end goal, i.e. keep the customers or, reduce net churn, but also day to day, what are the things you need to do? And what are the resources you need to use in order to achieve those things? So I'll give you credit. You're kind of the one who spearheaded that in our team many years ago now. And then in terms of kind of doing that in a replicable fashion, I think at a certain point, the team gets to a stage where you need more managers. So you as a leader need to make the decision of how many people can be in a team and who amongst the people that you already have in the team could potentially step into a leadership role so that they could guide other people on what they've learned. If you can do that, then you have a sort of self-reinforcing system. So that you've probably taught everybody similarly to begin with. They've come in, you've given them the platform to be successful. Now they're in a position to lead others. Hopefully they replicate and improve upon what you did before, and so on and so on and so on. And then you grow the team. To sum it up, I think you start with what is workload, what's valuable, what can the CSM in this example, what can they actually manage? And if you're getting close to that point, should you be hiring again? Should you be hiring for a similar profile of person, or should you be hiring someone different based on do they speak different languages? Do they have different skill sets? Do you want to do something slightly different the next time around? And then you just try and keep half an eye on what is replicable and what is sustainable. I think especially now, especially with a slightly more difficult economic climate, there's going to be a lot of businesses that push people probably a little bit too hard, and they say, look, we don't want to take a risk on adding yet one more person right now. Maybe we're a bootstrap company. We just can't really do that right now. There's going to be a trade-off there. You might get through the next few months and then everything is rosy again, but you might have burnout people who then leave and then you need to slow down to replace them. So I would say you could obviously go as deep as you wanted to in terms of processes and what to document and what to report on and how often to speak about it. But I think it's just about knowing what you want in the first instance, telling people what you expect of them, rewarding them when they do well, helping them when they don't. Just do that. Just be consistent.
Yeah, and I think documenting and creating processes helps with that. I mean, we've seen it, of course, ourselves as well. It not just makes things easier for management or for yourself, but also for people coming on board because they know exactly what to do. So it's not micromanaging, it's helping them to shape the role they become in, and to also have them do self-education and to really know exactly what to do in which situation without always having to ask somebody.
Exactly. And I think in addition to that as well, I think it's important that we recognize, especially the way that most people work now, or many people work remotely, many people are at a distance from their team. We're a long way removed from the historic version of work, where it would be very clear when the day begins, when the day ends, how productive you've been, mean we're a long way away from a factory, So in this case, giving people those kind of guidelines to start with helps people to understand, hey, I've done a good job or I haven't. And that helps people immensely because it takes a lot of the stress away. A lot of workplace stress comes from people not knowing exactly what is expected. So if you start with the principle that, hey, here's what good looks like, and you show them that and you give them the basis upon which to grow, they'll more often than not succeed kind of beyond their own expectations because of that system.
Yeah, and when you make it visible to them and to the entire team, they're even more motivated and it's more clear on what is expected, who's behind. So there's never a question, I guess, what's going on there.
100%. And that's probably one of the most challenging things for founders to do early on in a business. It's incredibly difficult because there's so many things changing all the time. How do you provide that consistency? I would say it might not always be possible, but you need to make it clear to your team that you're trying, that you understand how much is changing, because otherwise it might look like you have just woken up one day and the whole system has changed. People find it very difficult to react to that.
Yeah, and the faster a company grows, processes will break. You will have to change them, but you will need to create them to make sure the team works. So it's a never-ending job in that sense.
Very true.
When we go back to the metrics you talked about, when we talk about the financial metrics you mentioned, so gross churn, net churn, and expansion. Let's just take net churn. Can you speak of any challenges, obstacles you faced while trying to decrease net churn, which is always, of course, almost equivalent when at least management talks about CS, decreasing net churn? Do you have any advice for other SaaS founders to decrease it?
For sure. I think there's a few bits to that. Firstly, you're never operating in a vacuum, right? By which I mean, it's never just as simple as you take an action and then everything improves. I know we all read there's lots of kind of LinkedIn parables that you read every day where it's just like, I did this and now everything is 700% better than it was before. But in reality, there's always a list of factors that are driving any given change. I would say, without wanting to be certain kind of too philosophical about it, I think you have to be realistic in terms of what are the factors that might drive net churn. For instance, smaller businesses have higher rates of net churn than larger businesses by and large. I think I went to SaaS. We think we were both there last year. There was even a pamphlet that I remember opening up, and it was literally just divided by amount of revenue in your particular company, churn rate. And the churn rate is precipitously higher at smaller companies than it is larger ones. Maybe that is due to the fact that bigger companies have more process, more products, they can expand more, or maybe not. So there are factors at play that are harder to deduce than just simply sell more and the numbers will improve. In terms of specific challenges, over the course of the last couple of years, I think we've all experienced a couple of shocks. I think we're going through one of them now. I think there's obviously an economic slowdown and a rebalancing going on, and especially for the tech industry. And I think before that, a lot of businesses experienced kind of COVID-related churn that was probably a lot higher than what they'd experienced before historically as well. I would say if we start with those more kind of unusual events, I think those are probably the times to double down on the point we were making before about the value. What value are you generating for your customer? When do you generate that value? How can you amp that up a little bit? How can you make it clearer to your customer that value is being generated? And can you offer them something ancillary to your core product that would make that value even more? There are some brilliant businesses out there that have done that amazingly. They monetize additional features to their products, and then from there, their growth kind of goes up very rapidly. But that comes down to knowing the value that you're generating to your customer and knowing what they'd be willing to pay for it, and making yourself as sticky as possible. In terms of slightly more tactical things, you might want to consider integrations. Does your product neatly integrate with other tools that your customer uses? If it does, they are much less likely to ever unplug that. If it doesn't, you've made yourself very easily replaceable. So little things like that can make a big difference. I would say one obvious one, which I think many people with a bit of experience of doing both have a preference for, is the classic debate about monthly plans versus annual plans. You can grow pretty quickly if you offer monthly plans because customers will say, I can try out your product. That is very dangerous anyway, because if you don't have a really good command of the value you're generating for your customer, another event comes along like the one we're currently experiencing, you will experience higher churn because you're just easier to get rid of than an annually paid invoice, even if you provide more value. So that's something to think about. If you offer monthly plans right now, do you need to do that forever? And is there a way that you could transition to a longer term deal? Is there even a way that you could kind of flip your business model a little bit? Could the default be 24 months? And then as a sweetener to your customers, you offer 12 months as opposed to monthly versus annual? Something to think about, I would say. In general, when we think about net churn, I would say that kind of crises like COVID, like other things, yes, they cause more churn. They do. But very rarely are they kind of the root cause. I think what these shocks from from outside do is they exacerbate existing problems. So for instance, if you already had a usage problem, customers might not cancel in good times. They just might not. They might be too busy. It might be too small amount of money to care about. They've forgotten about it. Things are good. When the economy turns, they might start looking at their credit card statements and look with a little bit more clarity and might say, when was the last time I used that product? So again, back to that theme. If you have a core problem, you have to try and fix it, because whenever anything comes along that could shock your business, it will shock you hard.
Yeah, and this comes back to what you mentioned before. Look at growth churn, because then you know if something is going on and if you need to fix something in your product.
Yeah. And maybe there may be people listening to this that have not kind of explored that topic very much. I mean, at the very least, if a customer leaves you, you need to be asking them why they're leaving you, you know, and if you have somebody on your team who does have some time available to do this at this point, you should also be looking at those a little bit more critically and saying, okay, maybe the customer said they're churning because, for instance, okay, budget cuts, fine. That's a perfectly reasonable reason to cancel, I suppose. But you should also take a look. How often did they use the product? My classic example is like a CRM. How bad would the economy need to be for your average company to cancel their CRM contract? They'd have to basically be going out of business. So even when there are budget cuts, companies are still picking and choosing which budget to cut and why. So you might have the answer to that in your own product. You might be able to say, okay, they said budget cuts. We collected that churn reason, but look at all the customers that have churned for budget cuts. They all have low usage in the last 6 months. So we should do something about that. We should be taking action with the next cohort of customers that look similar and do something to implement that, to improve that. Because there's always something you can do, right? For those customers that are still there, there's always something you can do. You can always give them a call and say, okay, can we support you more, for instance?
Yeah, I think this is a really good summary, because when we summarize it, it's basically, who are you selling to, how are you selling, what are you selling, and how much value are you giving? So basically, what is the size of companies you're selling towards? Are you selling monthly versus annual? Are you selling one product or multiple products? And what is the value you're bringing? For example, the CRM example, which you will never drop or almost never drop, basically.
Yeah, there are just fundamentally some things that businesses see as being more essential than others. And the question is that why is your product not in that category? And if you can bring it into that category or bring it closer to that category, churn should decrease, right? I think depending on what stage of business you're at and depending on how much time you spend thinking about these sorts of problems, it can be quite tempting to maybe get into the habit of just always trying to solve the problem with the same solution. And I think that's something I'd caution against as well. So maybe, for instance, churn, you've just come to accept it as a fact of life. Every time a client churns for a particular reason, you do the same thing. You send the same email that's automated. You maybe get a response, you maybe don't. And then you park it in a report somewhere that you don't speak about because it's an uncomfortable topic. Many businesses do that. I think it's not the right way of approaching it. I would suggest, I saw something the other day on a completely different subject that I think is a really good thought to have, which was called new manager thinking. So basically, boil it down without any of the context. If you really boil that down, if somebody came in tomorrow to do your job, what would they do differently? More often than not, those areas are areas you could do something about. You could probably tackle them. So churn might be one of them. You might just be, to a certain extent, lazy about churn, or you don't want to bother customers after they've cancelled, and it's all a bit sticky as a subject. You don't want to get into it. Probably if someone else came in, they would say, well, we should probably do something about that. You could take that action now. So that's my kind of learning recently, or something that really resonated with me, just that idea of what are the changes if somebody just looked at this afresh they would make, and can we make them now?
Nice. And I mean, that's a good one. Take action, and what can we do now? And maybe to piggyback on that and go to your current company, Leadfeeder, what kind of actions do you guys take? So what do you guys do to make sure that the clients aren't churning?
Yeah, good question. So I think a lot of things. So we're in the middle of a big product expansion. Let's call it a product expansion at the moment that will lead us to having a far more comprehensive offering, right? I think when I look at some of the things that have driven churn in our business historically, very rarely has it ever been a customer with anything to complain about. More often than not, they've said something along the lines of, I want to be able to take your product and do something else with it. So what we've spent the last few months doing is that something else. So I can't kind of trail all of the things that are coming soon, but there will be a very, very, very significant product change in the future that will probably solve a lot of those issues. From a CS perspective, what do? Lots of things. I think, of course, for every client that leaves us, we collect that verbatim comment from the customer. So if they say, I'm churning because I don't like X, Y, and Z, we have that. It's publicly available. We collect it. We do something with it. Every client, we also do a post-mortem exercise, like like I said before, saying, okay, if we have this churn reason, fine, but what are the underlying causes that we think are present? We also then mark each client based on whether or not we think there's win-back potential for them. So did they churn for something we can fix now, or we will fix in the very near future? If so, let's apply a date against that we are going to follow that customer up again, and have the person who's been responsible for that account be responsible for following that up. So we're going to try and close that loop if we can, to try and maintain that customer in the future. The other thing is we try and make calls to the customer that let's actually have a conversation and see what we can actually do about this problem. Maybe there is a solution that's evident to us now, and it's easier to win back a customer today than it would be if we leave it for 6 months. Another thing that we've started doing as well for some of our smaller customers that maybe wouldn't get that much human interaction with us as a team is where the customer reports through our support team that they have a certain problem that's going to lead them to churn. Prior to them hitting the cancellation button, we offer a call with the support team. And I must say, when this idea first came up, I might even have been the one to suggest it, but even I was a little bit skeptical as to how successful that would be, because these are customers that maybe they don't have that much interaction with us in general, so they don't know us, they don't have that emotional connection to us. They're reporting a problem and they're about to churn. How likely are we to really be able to turn those around? But I won't take credit for this. This is a brilliant team of people on our side that's been working on this. They've been able to turn around a surprisingly large number of cases right at that 11th hour, right at the moment where they're about to hit the cancel button. They've been able to get on a call, show them something different about the product, and the customer chooses to stay with us. So even something as simple as that can be highly effective. If you can get ahead of the churn, so if they're about to do it but they've not yet done it, there's still a moment where you could potentially do something. So I'd recommend, if you've not yet experimented with taking that approach, try it. If you have somebody in your team that does support, but they're happy to get on a call with a customer, set them up with a calendar. Say to these customers that are coming through saying they will churn, hey, makes perfect sense, but can we have a quick chat about this, because I think we can solve this problem. Here's a link, book us in, let's follow up straight away. There's more, but I think there's probably more than most people will be able to implement straight away. So how does that sound, Jure?
That sounds good. And if they need more, we'll have you back in 6 months. But I think the main key here is that try things, do things, see how it goes. Even sometimes you think it might be overwhelming or it might not actually be working. Just put it into action and then see, what's going to happen, and measure what is happening afterwards.
Exactly that. And you do find sometimes there's a little bit of hesitation to do that, because people think, this is getting a bit too much like Amazon, when you want to cancel something with them and you have to go through 18 screens to do it. But sometimes you also have to ask yourself the other question, which is, what have you got to lose? They're going to churn anyway. This is revenue that's already been lost. You might as well ask one more question, try and have a conversation with them to try to change this a little bit.
Yeah, nice. We're coming down to the last 2 questions. Basically, these are questions related to the stage a company is in. So first of all, what kind of advice would you give somebody who's just starting out and growing to 10K monthly recurring revenue? What kind of advice would you give him regarding customer success?
Yeah, I would say it's never too early to start. And I think the steps that you want to take early on relate to some things that I said earlier on as well, that they come down to starting to think ahead. If somebody has to subsequently take these responsibilities off of you in your small team, and they need to deal with the customers, what are they going to need? What would benefit them or make their job easier? Certain things we've talked about being, for example, tracking metrics, tracking product usage, keeping a really good, accurate check of the conversations you've had with those customers. What have they been about? How effective have you been in solving their problems? Just starting to collect that information, ideally in a CRM system of some sort, so that somebody can subsequently come in, take a look at this and take it further with you afterwards. In addition to that, I think you can basically extend that same thinking to reporting. You can extend it to whether you're going to have a support function in the future. Just quite simply thinking, if all goes well, where are we going to be in 6 or 12 months? And what is the person I'm about to hire going to need? Especially if it's something you're not otherwise going to do because you just don't have the time available, you should do it. For instance, it might be setting up reporting. Do you need to get a contractor in for 2 weeks now to hook things up so that you have really good reports around all the ways that your product is being used? If you do that, not only will you be in a better position to guide the overall business, whoever comes in, help you afterwards, they won't have to ask you as many questions. They'll be a lot clearer on what success looks like. It'll be a lot easier for them to take weight off of you as opposed to put it back on.
Yeah, and I think this already relates to, the next question I have, as in, what would you recommend companies growing to 1 million ARR, or maybe even beyond that? It all starts with data, right? Insights. I think that's already definitely one.
Yeah.
What kind of other advice would you give to them who are a bit ahead, who have a team and want to make next steps here?
Yeah, I think as you get higher and higher on the revenue threshold that you just mentioned there, I think the more important it becomes to have really good processes. It's a tough dividing line between how much is too much. You don't want to create a situation too early on in your company when you still need to be scrappy to succeed. You don't want to create an environment where there's a document for everything, because it just stops people from thinking in the same way that they did before. And you need that creativity. So I'd say you want to try and dance on that line of enough process to really make sure that people can be happy and they can have autonomy in their roles, but not so much that you almost stifle the creativity that people had before when they had to be a little bit scrappy. So as you go further up, I think process becomes that much clearer. Same thing for departments and size of departments and how many people should be helping with a particular thing. Do you need a separate support team and CS team? Do you need an account management team? I think on that journey, whatever we said before, 10K, 50K to $1 million, somewhere along that journey, you're going to have those conversations with yourself. Do we need an account management team? Do we need more support people? Do we need a separate team in a separate country to take care of different time zones, for instance? I think I would advise wherever you are on that journey to start thinking slightly further over the hill. Again, I think you can be realistic but optimistic. If the things that you're doing now turn out to be really successful and you do hit these milestones that you no doubt have ahead of you at the moment, what are those people going to need from you? Do you need those people now? Is there something that you are going to put in place a year from now, maybe? If you brought it forward, you'd be a more successful business. And I think it's just that kind of long-termism. When you start to get up into those figures where you know that the business is going to be here in 6 or 12 months, you can start to think, okay, what are the long-term kind of pillars I want to put in place so that we can be a more successful business down the line? Because what a lot of people report as the company grows is you have those growing pains. Usually what those growing pains are is like the business is changing so rapidly, we can't keep up. And the way to maybe overcome that a little bit is to bring forward some of that change but in a manageable way with clear processes, reporting and everything else.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to give yourself peace of mind as well. If you're ahead of things, then you know what is coming up and you know what you need to have and what you need to do, and you already have it, then it's so much easier. Then you're just going to sleep well at night. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And you're going to be in a much better position as well on a personal level to speak with authority about the various different things about your business. So there's one of these things where it's a gain for your future CS team, but almost everything we've talked about is a gain for the whole business as well.
Is there anything we haven't discussed about customer success where you want to share some thoughts about?
Good question. I think not really. I would say that the main things that we've focused on here they've been data, they've been process, and they've been, in a sense, they've been kind of company culture. So maybe that's one that we could talk about a little bit, which I think is culture. I would say a successful team, full stop, but certainly a successful CS team is one where you are creating an environment where people can bring you new ideas. You're creating as many forums for that as possible. It's important to remember, like the CS team, you've not hired them just to be kind of customer troubleshooters. They can provide your business a lot more value if you give them the opportunity. So for instance, they are the people that every single day, multiple times a day, are going to be speaking to your customers. Let's see what those customers are saying. Maybe they have a better idea for what your product roadmap should be than you do. So if you create a forum for them to be able to share that, then you might be able to get somewhere. If you then implement some of those solutions, you're going to create a positive feedback loop that makes people want to do more of that and make a bigger contribution. So I would say when it comes to CS specifically, I think it's about harnessing a positive company culture where people can contribute, they can make suggestions, they can give input, and directing it towards your customer base in a certain way. Go and gather that feedback. Or if customers are having a lot of success, get a lot more case studies from them, get a lot more quotes from the website. I think there's a real opportunity to turn a lot of the things that often turn out to be ad hoc, short-term projects into long-term sources of value. For instance, oftentimes people go and search for new logos for the website because they're updating the website once every 18 months, or they need a new case study because they're going to expand into a certain industry. Going to look for that thing in the last possible moment, not a good way of being successful. If you figure out up front what the CS team could contribute, if you gave them the ability to do so and create the forum for them to succeed in doing that and also to be praised if they do it successfully, again, you can mitigate a lot of the kind of stresses and strains that come down the line, because it's dangerous to make the CS department the everything department. It happens quite a lot. So again, it comes back to process, but it also comes back to company culture, creating something there where people want to contribute more, they want to speak up, they want to give you and the business a lot more. I think you and I, when we work together, I think we've been quite successful in doing that. So I think there's some value to exploring that.
Yeah,
on
and
the
I think
listener side.
Exactly, and definitely make sure that the CS department is a department where wins are being made as well, right? Because net churn is something negative in a way. Like people are leaving you, and of course you can tackle it by expansion. But if you also have those wins with the number of reviews or case studies, basically make sure that you'll have those small wins on a day-to-day basis, because the company won't see the clients you saved, because in the end they're just staying and it's just a number who didn't show up in the reports in a way. But you can actually make those wins for the CSMs, for the team, in other ways as well, as you just mentioned, which is really nice.
Exactly. And then that's probably a principle you could apply to almost every role within a small business. You know, it's easy to forget sometimes how difficult some of these roles are. People are often operating with not that much budget. They don't have unlimited ability to hire more people. Maybe the company is having hard times. It could be really terminal for the business, you know. So I think what you and I have both experienced when we've worked together is when you have a culture where people are encouraged to help each other, but they're also encouraged to praise each other and celebrate the wins. I think it goes a long way to kind of instilling a great company culture and a long-term loyalty of employees as well, because people feel that they're not just the people that are responsible for explaining churn. They're also the people that generate a hell of a lot more value for their business. And, you know, that gives them pride in their work as well.
Exactly. If your employees are happy, then your clients should be happy or should become happy as well.
Absolutely.
My final question. If people want to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to reach out to you?
The best place would be LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Any questions around CS, any troubles that you're experiencing, be more than happy to have a chat with you and see if we can help you solve those problems.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think when you go to LinkedIn and type in Mike Dry, there might be just one, because I only know one Mike Dry, and that's you.
Yeah, there's only one.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Mike, to come on this show, and thank you for sharing your knowledge today.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
You've been listening to Growing a B2B SaaS. Joran has been a head of customer success before founding his own startup. He's experiencing the same journey you are. We hope you've gotten some actionable advice from the show, and we hope you had fun along the way. We know we did. Make sure to like, rate, and review the podcast in the meantime. To find out more and to hook up with us on our social media sites, go to www.getredditus.com. See you next time on Growing a B2B SaaS.